Chapter 6. Unfortunate Resignation. When Schiller went to bed that night, he realized that he could actually stay in Marvel indefinitely. He could sleep, return to DC, continue sleeping in DC, and then return to Marvel. Since time didn't pass in DC, he could always stay in Marvel and avoid the smog of Gotham City. However, good times don't last. Before Schiller could even take Peter and his family for a physical examination on the weekend, S.H.I.E.L.D. came knocking. It was another workday. Schiller had just finished his rounds and was using the internal doctor system to book an examination for Peter's family when there was a knock on his office door. Schiller, sitting behind his desk, didn't look up. Suddenly, his spider sense vibrated. He looked up warily to see a strange man standing at the door. "Hey, doctor, don't be nervous. I'm Coulson, a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent." The man noticed Schiller's tense posture. Schiller looked at him over his glasses and said, "Let's talk outside. These are all my patients." Coulson nodded quickly, and the two went downstairs together and sat down in a coffee shop next to the hospital. Schiller frowned and said, "Is S.H.I.E.L.D. short-staffed? Or is it difficult to find an agent who can wear a nurse's uniform?" Coulson was somewhat puzzled by Schiller's attitude. Shouldn't a normal person show fear or rejection when an agent suddenly shows up? It seemed his boss was right. This Schiller definitely had a problem. Schiller seemed a bit impatient. He said, "I've already been late for a day and absent for a day. The whole clinic knows I stay up late, drink, and do drugs. If you insist on causing me trouble, can't you wait until this passes? I'll get fired. But according to our information, you are only a temporarily hired psychology consultant at Elder's Hospital, and you are only filling in because the head of the psychiatry department is not here. Does that matter? I really need this job right now. What if you make me lose my job?" Coulson said, "I'm very sorry, Mr. Schiller. We didn't intend to disturb you. It's just that we heard you are Mr. Stark's psychologist, and we'd like to know more about his psychological state. Of course, we will pay the consultation fee on time. $1 million an hour. Eft." Coulson spat out a mouthful of coffee. He wiped his mouth and said, "If you refuse, you don't have to make such an excuse. If you can't afford it, don't come for treatment." Schiller rolled his eyes and got up to leave, acting like an unethical quack. Coulson didn't stop him. After Schiller left, he pressed his earpiece and said, "There's probably something fishy in that hospital. He was in a hurry to get me out and in a hurry to go back." Okay. Schiller returned to his consultation room. He concentrated, maximizing his telepathy, and then felt the emotions of the psychiatric patients, expressing some of those emotions in writing as much as possible. The inner world of a group of psychiatric patients was truly chaotic and insane. Schiller scribbled dozens of pages and locked them in a drawer. When he returned to his apartment that evening, he found that agents must have searched it. Schiller scanned with his spider sense and didn't find any listening devices or cameras, so he didn't bother with it. At S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury stared at the glowing data panel, which displayed Schiller's detailed information. Coulson said from behind him, "He's very nervous about his job and seems unwilling to leave that hospital. Many liquor bottles and some drugs were found in his home. These are some papers we found in his office tonight. Only these. More seem to have been urgently disposed of by him, because we found a large amount of shredded paper pulp flushed down the drain. Unfortunately, it's impossible to restore." Nick took the papers and said, "Does he have a mental illness? No, these don't seem like the ravings of one person. Is he collecting psychological data from psychiatric patients in the psychiatry department? How does he communicate with those psychiatric patients? This is clearly not information that a normal doctor could obtain. These records even contain extreme patient privacy." "Does he hypnotize?" Coulson asked. "Our psychologist does too. Can he make you tell him what color underwear you like to wear in elementary school?" Nick asked. "Perhaps he just made it all up," Coulson said. "He seems to have additional insight into Stark Industries' past and our old friends, and he can directly pinpoint Stark's weaknesses. Today, he even caused Stark's intelligent butler to fall into a logic loop." Nick said, "Do you want him to work for us? He has a way of dealing with Stark, and we'll have more people like him to handle in the future." Nick placed the stack of files aside and said, "In short, first figure out what's in that hospital, and if possible, transfer him from there. I hate this group of highly educated people. They are always too calm, cautious, and unfathomable. Such opponents who know how to use their brains are difficult to deal with." Nick said, "Perhaps he's just an ordinary psychologist, and collecting the ramblings of those patients is his hobby," Coulson said. "Coulson, Sometimes you make me doubt the credibility of your level 8 agent rank, Nick said. Someone who can make Stark completely lose his composure within 30 minutes and then swagger into Stark Industries the next day. Do you think he's an ordinary psychologist? Or do you think Tony Stark is really just a cynical playboy who only hangs out with models? Understood. I'll make him leave that hospital first, Coulson said. So, the next day, Schiller received the news of his dismissal in Stark's office. He spread his hands and said, "You see, I absolutely need your funding now, Mr. Stark. You wouldn't just watch your dedicated psychological consultant lose his job and go bankrupt, would you?" Stark said, $2 million isn't enough for you to open your own psychological clinic? Money isn't the problem. The problem is the qualifications required for a psychological clinic. I need to open a legally operating psychological treatment room, not a fraudulent institution on the street that's no different from fortune-telling. With your resume, you can't get approval? Yesterday, Jarvis told me you have 3 doctor degrees and have worked in the best hospitals in 6 different states. Yes. It's just that the location of the psychological clinic I want to open is a bit special. Schiller took a sip of iced wine and said, Stark, while tinkering with a machine, asked, "Where?" "Hell's Kitchen," Schiller said. Stark's hand trembled, and the poor Mark II burst into a series of sparks. He said, "I really can't see that you have the compassionate heart of a Saint Maria, wanting to save the poor wretches and drug addicts in that hellish district." Schiller didn't say much. He said, "I need a legally established psychological clinic in Hell's Kitchen. For that, I can grant you one request." Schiller put emphasis on the words, legally established. Stark said, "What could I possibly need to ask you for?" "Huh, what a joke. I'm Stark. Don't you want to know if Pepper truly loves you?" Stark's hand trembled again, and the Mark II's right leg directly exploded. Schiller silently took a step back, watching Stark, whose face was blackened by the explosion. Stark nervously rubbed his face and said, "What did you say? What about Pepper?" Apparently, Stark hadn't yet realized his feelings for Pepper. "I can tell you at an appropriate time whether Pepper truly loves you. Guaranteed to be accurate. You've seen my abilities. Pepper, of course, loves me. All the women in the world love Stark." Stark said, "Is that so? Is she just one of the women in the world? The kind with nothing special?" Schiller asked. Stark fell silent. "I can agree to it. Of course, starting tomorrow, you don't need to come for any more psychological counseling for me. If Pepper looks for you, just put her off. Can't you afford the consultation fee anymore?" Stark, like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, shouted, "I can afford it even if you charge $10 million an hour. I just don't need any psychological counseling. I'm not crazy. I'm fine." Schiller shook his head and slowly said, "I'm afraid Mark II doesn't think so." He and Stark simultaneously looked down at the suit of armor missing a leg. Stark pointed to the door. "Get out now!" Schiller returned home and texted Peter. "The weekend physical examination has been booked. I'll inform the hospital to provide you with thorough service. But our meeting time might be postponed because I've already resigned from that hospital." Peter quickly expressed his concern, but Schiller only said it was a change in his career planning and didn't elaborate. Peter was a bit touched, as Schiller was still thinking about the previously arranged physical examination even after resigning. He eagerly said, "Are you still in New York? If you are, I think we could meet up, go out for a meal or something, or you could come to my place." Schiller politely declined Peter and messaged Charles. "What do you think would happen if I opened a hospital in hell? I'm afraid the devil wouldn't appreciate it. You seem to feel strongly about this. I advise you not to do that. Perhaps you are just a talented ordinary person. But ordinary people cannot resist the devil. But only criminals can fight criminals, right?" Charles, on the other side of the computer, fell silent looking at that sentence. He thought, "Max, do you think so too? Only by becoming a criminal can one deal with the most heinous criminals?" Charles shook his head. "No, justice must have its fair way of being realized. If one has to descend into hell to fight the devil, then there's no difference from colluding with them." Outside the window, the students of Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters were chasing and playing on the playground. Storm was scolding them to go back to class, while Jean watched from the side. Everything seemed beautiful. Only Xavier knew that the shadow of the Dark Phoenix was still far from gone. Chapter 7 Daredevil returns in vain. As Schiller returned to his apartment, he could clearly feel someone following him, and the enhanced vision from his spider sense allowed him to see someone seemingly watching him from across the apartment building. The apartment building opposite was a full glass structure, and there was a small pane within it whose reflection differed from the rest, which Schiller keenly perceived. His choice to open a clinic in Hell's Kitchen was not without purpose. After several days of observation, he had largely figured out the daily routines of the residents in the apartment building. Most of the people living there were office workers and white-collar elites. They were mostly single, had very regular work hours, and their social circles were quite fixed. Living among such a group made it far too easy for agents to find weaknesses. Hell's Kitchen, however, was different. Although it was the largest slum and gang gathering place in Manhattan, New York, and even the United States, it had a high population density, heavy foot traffic, many strangers, and various gangs nested and entrenched. It was truly the most suitable place for an outsider like Schiller, who was intent on fishing in troubled waters. Life in a high-end apartment, though comfortable, might not compare to the freedom of Hell's Kitchen. Schiller believed that if he stayed in that apartment for a few more days, at least 4 or 5 of his neighbors would become SHIELD agents. Various people with unclear backgrounds would try to approach him by any means, attempting to extract information, possibly about himself or Stark. This was SHIELD's way of doing things. They didn't care if you needed privacy. Hell's Kitchen was also slightly different from Gotham. Although Hell's Kitchen also had countless gangs, big and small, its danger level was still a bit lower compared to Gotham. It was more populated by the poor, gamblers, and drug addicts, with no Scarecrow or Joker, and no major villains of note. Most of the people there were still ordinary people. Although guns and drugs were rampant, the victims were more often ordinary people, rather than special individuals with superpowers. Schiller planned to make it his first base in Marvel. Stark was highly efficient. Before long, he managed to persuade some council members to allocate a hospital slot to Hell's Kitchen. Some council members took this opportunity to loudly proclaim their benevolence, claiming that New York would not abandon any of its citizens. However, they never expected this hospital to actually open, knowing that it was Hell's Kitchen, a place where even the devil would be cooked. Open a hospital there? Don't joke around. Unless the hospital could be built like a concentration camp, preferably with tanks and cannons piled at the entrance, and all the doctors and nurses inside carrying machine guns, there might be a slim hope. Otherwise, all the medicine there would be looted overnight. But no matter how disbelieving the council members were, or how numb the people of Hell's Kitchen were, a small psychology clinic was still established in Hell's Kitchen. As Manhattan's most famous and largest slum, its 8 blocks were merely a designation. In reality, its scope extended far beyond 8 blocks, with dozens of intricate streets and about 100 gangs intertwined. Some people say Kingpin is the boss of Hell's Kitchen, but in reality, that's not the case. Kingpin's business scope extends far beyond Hell's Kitchen. His criminal enterprise chain covers the entire eastern United States and even the East Coast. His business spans the United States. Hell's Kitchen might involve some of his drug and smuggling operations, but he neither lives there nor constantly monitors it. Nightcrawler, born in Hell's Kitchen, was his mortal enemy, but they hardly ever fought in Hell's Kitchen. Little Spider, who had fought Kingpin multiple times, was still just an ignorant high school student at this time. Kingpin's ambition was far beyond unifying Hell's Kitchen. He didn't care about the disturbances that arose there, because every day there were various gang wars, robberies, kidnappings, brawls, and missing persons cases. A little trouble was nothing at all. Therefore, when Kingpin, who was far away in San Francisco, heard that some of his subordinates in Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan, had gone insane, he merely thought they had overdosed on drugs and paid no attention. However, a terrifying rumor gradually spread in Hell's Kitchen. They heard that in the psychology clinic opened at the very end of Mary Street, in Ninth Tail Alley, lived a terrifying eccentric doctor. All gang members who came to collect protection money or extort him would, not long after, run out in terror and then go insane. When this first started, a few well-known gang bosses, not believing in evil, had led their subordinates inside. But before long, they acted as if they had encountered some monster. They frantically began fighting the air, struggling, screaming, running, crying, as if possessed by some ghost. This incident caused quite a stir. Almost all of Mary Street heard about it, and the rumors spread quickly. Word spread like wildfire, and everyone heard that Ninth Tail Alley was absolutely off-limits, that there was a terrifying curse there that would make you see your deepest fears, and you would eventually be scared insane. Later, when Schiller, who lived there, started going out, everyone heard that he was the master of the clinic in Ninth Tail Alley. Only then did people realize that it wasn't some ghost, but a peculiar psychologist. According to Schiller's explanation, Those gang bosses had done too many bad deeds, and he had merely given them some friendly psychological counseling. As for why they went insane, perhaps it was evil receiving its just deserts. The people of Hell's Kitchen would believe his words when pigs fly. For anyone living there, their consensus was that bad people get good outcomes. No one born in Hell's Kitchen would feel guilty. Crime is normal here, and criminals are the majority. Guilty? Do you expect someone who started selling guns and drugs, fighting, extorting, and gambling since their teens to have any conscience? How could such a person feel guilty, and feel so guilty that they went insane? Everyone who heard about this believed Schiller was a dark magic practitioner, and that he could cast curses on those people. As for Schiller, he wouldn't explain. The fear toxin brought from DC was indeed very effective. Although it was only the initial version, it worked very well against ordinary people without superpowers. From the moment he discovered he could carry objects between the two worlds, he conceived the idea of being a middleman. Although the power systems of Marvel and DC are different, there are many things that can be traded between them. Of course, there are also many things that can be exchanged to deal with each other's enemies. For example, if Schiller used fear toxin in Gotham, once the news got out, Jonathan, seeing the patient's symptoms, would definitely associate it with his own fear toxin. But in Marvel, how could Jonathan know about the situation in Marvel? Schiller, of course, wouldn't have to pay any royalties. After this terrifying rumor spread, almost no gang members came to bother Schiller anymore. Of course, the consequence of mingling with these criminals was that a superhero came knocking. On a slightly cold night in Manhattan, Schiller had just made a hot coffee. He closed and locked the clinic door, ready to end his day of slacking off, get a good night's sleep, and continue to bother Stark tomorrow. Just as he placed the coffee cup on the table, he heard a crisp sound at the door. He turned around, and in the dim light, he saw a tall man in a red leotard standing outside the door. Schiller turned and picked up his coffee cup, saying, "You seem a bit late, Mr. Nightcrawler. Do you know me, Doctor?" Nightcrawler asked. "Of course I know you, Nightcrawler. You're famous in Hell's Kitchen," Schiller said. "But you seem to have only recently arrived here," Nightcrawler said. "But I'm more familiar with your other identity, Attorney Matt." Nightcrawler was clearly shocked. He didn't know how Schiller had figured out his true identity. Before he could ask, Schiller said, "You achieved outstanding results at Columbia University, and your career path after graduation was very smooth. Not only did you become a good lawyer, but you also seem to have opened your own law firm. Matt, can you tell me why you became Nightcrawler? Wasn't the pride of upholding justice that a law firm brought you enough?" "Lawyer? Upholding justice?" Nightcrawler scoffed. He said, "Perhaps you would think that way. Yes, most people think that way, believing lawyers should speak out for justice and defend the vulnerable. But in reality, do you think lawyers shouldn't do that? Of course they should. I mean, you think you couldn't do it as a lawyer? So, you wanted to take another approach. But if you couldn't do it as a lawyer, can you do it by putting on a ridiculous leotard and a mask?" Nightcrawler said angrily, "My decisions are none of your business. You know what? Your tone just now sounded very much like a rebellious little boy," Schiller said. Only then did Nightcrawler realize that from the moment he entered, he had fallen into Schiller's linguistic trap. The pace of the conversation had been led by him, not only exposing his true identity but also touching upon his inner sensitive points. He took a deep breath, calmed down, and said, "I have to admit, you are a good psychologist, and you're very good at using little tricks in conversation. But I still have to ask, who exactly are you? What is your purpose in Hell's Kitchen? Why did those people go insane? You have too many questions. I can only answer one tonight. Obviously, I've worked all day and I'm very tired. You can't disturb my rest. After all, I'm not a gang member, nor have I broken the law," Schiller said. "But you drove those gang members insane. You have no evidence. The police need evidence. Do you think you are nobler than the police? Stop beating around the bush with me," Nightcrawler said. "If you listened carefully to what I said, you would know where I came from and how I knew your identity." Nightcrawler felt a headache coming on. He really disliked dealing with such cunning opponents, as it required him to maintain constant high concentration. And due to the shock he felt earlier, he completely forgot his conversation with Schiller when he first arrived. Now, when asked to recall, his mind was blank. But if he couldn't answer, it would make him look stupid, so he remained silent. "It seems you've already forgotten our conversation from a minute ago. I really don't know. Becoming a superhero, it seems, means you don't need a good memory," Schiller mocked. Nightcrawler was secretly annoyed. He swore he would remember every word Schiller said from then on. 2 years ago, I taught at Columbia University. I saw the list of outstanding graduates, and your name was on it, Matt. And when you filled out your post-graduation plans, you said you would open a law firm, also within Kansas. Although I am a psychology professor, I know your former teacher, and he mentioned in conversation that you did indeed achieve your dream. Don't change the subject. What I want to know is, how did you know Nightcrawler is Matt? You might not remember, but when you first started on this path, you wore the black and yellow outfit your father wore during his matches. After I came to Hell's Kitchen, I once went to watch underground boxing matches, and coincidentally, the boss there, perhaps to save costs, never changed the style of clothing worn by the boxers. I then understood that Nightcrawler was perhaps born here, and he must have a connection to underground black market boxers. After investigation, all the gang members you killed were related to your father's death. And once your father's identity was found out, it was naturally not difficult to know yours. Why did you investigate me? Are you guilty of something? Matt asked. Nothing, it's just that if you're going to rent a house, you need to know who the landlord is, what he does, and it's best to get along with him. I'm not the landlord here, Nightcrawler scoffed. Oh, really? Then it seems I found the wrong person. I should go find Kingpin, but I seem to have already made an enemy of him. I vaguely remember that among the gang members who visited me, someone mentioned that their boss was Kingpin. Kingpin? You have information about Kingpin? Sort of. Consider it my rent payment. I heard one of his subordinates say that their boss is already very impatient with a kid named Nightcrawler. He plans to find someone to kill you, that fly, so you'd best be careful lately. Finally, Nightcrawler rushed back to his base. It wasn't until he got back that he realized he hadn't achieved any of his goals that night. He neither figured out who Schiller was, nor warned him to behave, nor did he clarify his relationship with those gangs. He also didn't know how he managed to drive those people insane. Matt slapped his forehead. He suddenly felt that Schiller's analogy was correct. He was like someone who had rented out his house to a tenant of unknown origin, and this tenant had preemptively paid the rent. This left him with no immediate way to take coercive measures to make him move out, and he could only let him swagger around Hell's Kitchen. Chapter 8. He's not Batman yet. On a morning in Gotham City, still shrouded in smog, Schiller stretched and sat up from his bed. He had just settled down in Marvel and enjoyed a few days of leisure when he discovered S.H.I.E.L.D. agents appearing near his psychology clinic again. Those people were like gum that couldn't be shaken off. Perhaps that was true for ordinary people. Even Stark, the wealthy magnate of that world, was still annoyed by them and helpless. But Schiller was different. After being annoyed by the young Batman in Gotham, he could simply pack up and leave, going to Marvel to enjoy some peace. Now that he was being watched by agents in Marvel, he could choose to leave again and come to Gotham to hide. The agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had no idea how Schiller disappeared. His departure left no traces. There were no train or plane tickets, and his figure was not seen at any road intersections. This only strengthened Nick Fury's conviction that Schiller was by no means an ordinary person. Upon returning to the DC world, his colleague, the future Scarecrow Jonathan, had not discovered that his fear toxin had been stolen, because Schiller was not greedy. He only took a small test tube's worth. After all, he wasn't like Scarecrow, who used fear toxin to create terrorist attacks. He only needed to deal with a few low-level gang members, and he didn't need any high-tech equipment to spray the toxin. He just needed a small spray bottle, and by spraying it at an ordinary person's nose, this concentrated fear toxin became the best weapon, as those gang members couldn't possibly have Batman's reaction speed. While studying this toxin, although Schiller didn't have systematic chemical knowledge, he at least knew how to make the best use of it. Besides spraying it as a weapon, Schiller found that this initial version of fear toxin seemed impure. Besides inducing fear, it could also induce some other negative emotions. This was the best news for a psychologist, as treatment couldn't proceed if the patient was unwilling to reveal his inner emotions. Schiller found that he could completely use fear toxin, diluted hundreds of times, as perfume on himself. He didn't know why, perhaps it was due to the system, but this toxin had no effect on him, yet it could cause people who approached him to be infected with a small amount of negative emotions. That's right, Schiller planned to use this trick against the inexperienced Bruce, who was the young Batman. The current Batman was not the omniscient old man he would later become. Bruce was still too young, having just traveled the world and learned many skills. He was eager to begin his revenge plan. He put on the initial version of the Batman suit, took his Batman batarangs, and wanted to fight crime. In his eyes, spending hundreds of millions to build equipment was a simple matter, but he hadn't yet realized that what truly made him Batman was not these external things, but the spirit deep within him. Clearly, Batman still had a long way to go in his growth, and Schiller, for his own safety and a stable life in Gotham in the future, had no choice but to serve as the young Bruce's mentor. It was another ordinary morning. For Bruce, encountering Schiller in the rainy night was just last night's event. Schiller called out his real name, and Bruce wasn't surprised. He knew this person must have something extraordinary about him. Perhaps it was superpowers or perhaps magic. During his travels around the world, he had seen many such people, and he also knew that this world was far from as simple as ordinary people imagined, with many incredible forces lurking and observing. Bruce knocked on the psychologist's door again. A steady and deep "come in" came from inside. Somehow, Bruce felt a sense of relief because the response came very quickly. Clearly, the person inside knew who he was and was happy to let him in. Batman hated all mystery and nihilism, and so did Bruce. In his opinion, Schiller's attitude meant that perhaps he would tell Bruce what was going on instead of continuing to evade and conceal or play word games with him. Bruce sat down opposite Schiller again. Bruce said, "Professor, it seems you're in a good mood today." "Mr. Wayne, it seems you're not in a good mood today," Schiller said. "I thought you'd come and pour me a cup of coffee like on the first day." He spread his hands, indicating the empty desktop. "You know, I deliberately didn't make coffee this morning, waiting for you." Bruce was silent for a moment, but still got up to make Schiller a cup of coffee. Schiller actually just found it interesting to drink coffee brewed by Batman himself, but Bruce thought it was a test, or a technique of mental interference, using words to force the other party to act according to his command. Well, thinking that way, it probably fit Schiller's persona better, a mad doctor obsessed with the study of psychology and spiritualism. Schiller took a sip of hot coffee, which dispelled the chill that permeated his body due to Gotham's cold weather. Bruce spoke first. "Why were you there last night? I don't understand what you mean. If you wanted to hide, you should have worn a mask last night, instead of choosing to deny it now after I've seen your face." Schiller put down the coffee cup, making a crisp sound on the desktop. He said, "I'm not denying that you saw me last night. I'm asking you, why would you, with hundreds of millions in wealth, not donate and set up charitable foundations, but instead wear a ridiculous tight suit and run around the streets of Gotham City in the heavy rain, fighting hand-to-hand with some thugs?" Faced with this question, Bruce was silent. "This isn't a rhetorical question," Schiller said. "You don't need to think about how to answer, because I will answer you. Because your fundamental purpose is not to help, but to retaliate." "This is the answer you gave me," Bruce said. "No, I just saw the answer in your heart," Schiller said. "I don't believe there's such a thing as mind reading in this world." Of course, there's no such thing as mind reading in this world. It's just that some people don't realize how their strong inner desires can be expressed. People always think they hide their true selves well, but in reality, that's not the case. "Can I learn this ability?" Bruce asked. "This ability to see through people's hearts, and then use them to retaliate against criminals?" Schiller asked. "Clearly, you've thought of all this too simply, Bruce. Perhaps your motivation is revenge, but if you treat it as the sole driving force for everything you do, then it will be like last night." Schiller made a downward gesture, and Bruce explained, "Last night when I got back, I added a cape to my Batman armor, and I'm also planning to design a utility belt. You know those things aren't the point. You can add an iron fist with thousands of kilograms of force to your hand, or an engine to your boots that can make you leap to the moon. You can even design a pair of wings for yourself to fly to any planet in the solar system. You can do these things, Bruce. I believe you can do them. But these are not enough, far from enough. If I had such power, I could eliminate all criminals in the world, couldn't I?" Bruce asked. Schiller sighed. Clearly, Batman, who had not yet met Joker, could not imagine how an unarmed criminal, an ordinary person who only knew a little acrobatics and fighting, and was thin and weak, could defeat a superhero proficient in hundreds of fighting techniques and who had learned various abilities from all over the world. Schiller felt that no matter how he guided the current Bruce, the future Batman, he could only be considered an associate professor in Batman's life. The one who truly taught Batman everything was precisely his arch-nemesis, Joker. And now, Joker should still be living a very ordinary life in some circus. The current Bruce was still very arrogant. He made a request to Schiller to study psychology, because that's how he had learned various skills from all over the world. His humility, eagerness to learn, and arrogance, in fact, did not conflict. Schiller said, "It's still the same thing. Of course you can study psychology. Everything is in the textbooks. You can come and listen to my lectures, go home and memorize, do homework, write papers, and then take the final exam. I am a professor. I will not stop any student from learning. You know I don't want to learn that. Then what exactly do you think there is? Your special ability. Bruce gestured. He said, I've seen many such people around the world. They have special abilities that ordinary people don't. No, I'm not like them. I don't have any abilities beyond the ordinary. Bruce pondered for a moment, then pursed his lips, clearly not believing him. But Schiller really had nothing more to explain. The young Batman was clearly still too naive. He was too straightforward, impulsive, and didn't consider the consequences. And he seemed too impatient. The lack of smooth progress in his superhero career only exacerbated this impatience. Clearly, he felt that if he could learn those mind-reading-like abilities from Schiller, he could deal with criminals more easily, instead of being pushed down a building by a few gang members and falling embarrassingly to the ground. He hadn't even figured out what caused his failure. Bruce returned from Schiller empty-handed once again. Schiller merely told him, even threatened him, that he had better study hard, complete all his courses, and get a good grade on the final exam. But Bruce clearly hadn't listened to a single word. In the evening, Schiller went out again. He went to Jonathan's secret base again and stole a lot of fear toxin. This time, even if Jonathan was stupid, he should have been able to see that more than half of his 2 rows of test tubes were missing. Schiller wasn't proficient in any chemical knowledge. He couldn't perform any improvements or modifications to these special gases, only put them into different containers or perform some simple dilutions. But there was one more thing he could do, and that was to use this fear toxin to scare Batman. Soon, Schiller reappeared in the Mosen Street district. He knew Batman would come here again. Bruce was the kind of person who, wherever he fell, he would definitely get back up there, never willing to change locations. This was his pride. The entire Mosen Street district was not large, with only 6 alleys. The building Bruce fell from was exactly in the first alley of the Mosen Street district, where there was a nightclub controlled by the Water Ditch Gang. The Water Ditch Gang was just a small Gotham gang because there was a Gotham drainage ditch next to the Mosen Street district, and the Water Ditch Gang liked to throw some tragic victims into that ditch, which became increasingly foul-smelling. So other gangs started using Water Ditch to refer to this gang, and the Water Ditch Gang was quite pleased and proud of this. Batman's first enemies were clearly not famous villains. They were just a group of thugs smoking upstairs in a nightclub. Batman used his fighting skills to defeat most of them, but due to his lack of combat experience, someone threw lime in his eyes, and he stumbled and fell from the building. Early Batman had no assistance, and his equipment was not mature. It was not surprising that he would fail in a gutter. However, the Water Ditch Gang did not have such good luck a second time. Schiller leaned against a wall at the end of the Mosen Street district for a while, and then heard terrified shouts from the nightclub. Soon the night became quiet, and a small gang that no one would care about disappeared into Gotham. Batman walked out, clearly in much better condition than last time. He was looking down, seemingly still pondering how to modify his Batman equipment. Suddenly, he remembered something, so he walked forward and turned a corner. He wanted to find that beggar and give him some more US dollars, and tell him that the Water Ditch Gang had been dealt with by him, and that he would no longer be in danger with the money. Indeed, he found the beggar in the old spot again. She was still tightly wrapped in her blanket, shivering in Gotham's damp, cold night air. The umbrella Schiller had given her was also gone. Batman handed him the money and said in a low voice, "There are no more gangs in this district. You are safe now." The beggar trembled and looked up, but Batman saw no gratitude in his eyes. He disbelievingly discovered that the beggar's eyes, fixed on him, held only hatred. "Aren't you happy?" Batman asked. "Of course he isn't." A familiar voice came from above Batman's head. Schiller stood on the balcony of the beggar's building, looking down at Batman from the second floor. Because of the Water Ditch Gang, that nightclub would have a steady stream of customers every day. Some customers would hold food in their hands, and when they had only a little left, they would casually throw it on the roadside, so the beggar could pick it up and continue eating. But now that the Water Ditch Gang is gone, the nightclub can't stay open. No customers means no food. But a few hundred US dollars are enough for him. Yes, you have the best medical system in all of Gotham, private doctors, and family health consultants. You haven't experienced a few colds or fevers, and you don't know what it feels like to be frozen to the point of not being able to stand up. In your imagination, he could easily take a few hundred US dollars to the nearest supermarket, buy enough daily necessities, maybe even find a hotel to stay for a few nights, and then cure his illness. Schiller drew out the last word. then continued. But unfortunately, he can't even do the first step. Batman knelt down. He pulled open the blanket at the beggar's feet and found that her entire lower limbs were already bruised and purple from the cold. Gotham City had been raining for several days, and her legs had been soaking in water, already swollen beyond recognition. Batman was proficient in surgical theory. He knew that even in Gotham's best hospital, such lower limbs could only be amputated. He fell completely silent, looking at the many US dollar bills that the beggar hadn't held in his hand, but had let them fall freely to the ground. He felt an incredible absurdity, a suffocating shame. He suddenly felt many negative. Chapter 9. Batman is shaken again. Detective Gordon unbuttoned the collar of his shirt, twisted his neck, relaxed his shoulders, and then turned to look out the window at Gotham's dark, rainy night, which was still cold and damp. His colleagues greeted each other and left the police after work. One of them said to Detective Gordon, "Hey man, you shouldn't have taken on that difficult case. Dozens of missing persons? You'll probably be sifting through files until midnight again tonight." Detective Gordon smiled helplessly and said, "You said it, dozens of missing persons. I have to take it seriously." After his colleagues left, Detective Gordon made himself a strong cup of coffee. He planned to work through the night. The missing persons case in Moson Street District was very strange. In previous missing persons cases, even if they were well concealed, the bodies of some deceased victims would still be found. But among the 46 people who disappeared in Moson Street District, not a single body appeared on the streets of Gotham, which was very abnormal. Gotham has never been a city that abides by the law. Its Gotham Mafia are as numerous as cattle. No experienced Gotham Mafia member would bother to dispose of bodies, as it's a thankless task. They would just throw the bodies from a building, even though they knew it wouldn't fool the police. But the police are nothing in Gotham. Among the dozens of people who disappeared in Moson Street District, there were people from all walks of life. They had almost no common patterns, the only commonality being that they were permanent residents of Moson Street District. At this time, Detective Gordon was still very young. He was just a minor head in the Gotham Police Department, a long way from becoming the director. This hot potato of a case, which no one wanted to touch, was eventually taken on by the very righteous Detective Gordon. Although he knew it was very likely to be a thankless job, he still intended to complete it diligently to seek justice for the victims. Just as he was staying up late organizing files and was incredibly sleepy, he suddenly felt a movement behind him. When he turned his head, a huge shadow enveloped him. Detective Gordon immediately reached for his waist, but his pistol was not there. The person opposite him was wearing a black bodysuit with two pointed ears on his head and a black cape. His figure was tall, almost blocking all the light from above. Detective Gordon cautiously said, "Who are you? Why are you in the Gotham Police Department?" "You can call me a vigilante. I'm investigating the missing persons incident in Moson Street District. I noticed you went there today and yesterday too. You should be the detective in charge of this case. I hope to get the files of these missing persons." Detective Gordon was about to refuse the person opposite him when he spoke again. "Of course, I also have some clues here that I can exchange with you, or rather, I can work with you to solve this case." A vigilante? Detective Gordon thought this is too absurd. Such a person couldn't exist in Gotham City, otherwise it wouldn't be called the City of Sin. Detective Gordon and Batman's first encounter was not pleasant. The two of them confronted each other in the Gotham Police Department for a long time. Clearly, Batman, who was new to the scene, hadn't yet grasped the essence of leaving without saying everything. He lingered with Detective Gordon for a long time and finally became impatient. Batman found himself truly unlucky. Gotham City had countless negligent police, but he just happened to encounter the most serious one. Detective Gordon even wanted to protect those files with his death. And Batman didn't want to hurt him, so there was no better way. After Batman cleared out the Water Ditch Gang, he was greatly shaken by that beggar. Although he eventually saved the beggar, he clearly reflected on his actions and began to be less ambitious, starting with the simplest tasks. This was the starting point of his superhero path, Moson Street District. Besides the Water Ditch Gang, it was not peaceful here either. The missing persons case in Moson Street District had reached a very dangerous number. The permanent population here was only a few hundred, but more than 40 people had disappeared. Batman decided to make this case the starting point of his debut. And, of course, he had a suspect, a university professor, not sleeping in the middle of the night, sneaking into the street district where the Gotham Mafia were located, appearing for no reason, and disappearing for no reason. Is there anyone more suspicious than this? Batman hadn't thought about directly confronting Professor Schiller, but he knew that he would probably have difficulty winning against this professor in terms of words. He had lost both of his previous confrontations with Professor Schiller. He felt that he must gather sufficient evidence before bringing him to justice. This day, Batman went to Mosen Street District again. He couldn't get the missing persons case files from Detective Gordon, so he snuck into the home of a missing person, hoping to find some other clues in his house. As soon as he climbed out of the window, he saw Professor Schiller's shadow again. Under a street lamp not far downstairs, Professor Schiller was again holding a black umbrella, looking at the wall opposite. Batman saw him. He found that Professor Schiller was looking at the place where the beggar used to stay, but there was no beggar there now. Batman had sent that beggar to the best hospital in Gotham City and covered all his treatment expenses. Although the beggar had both feet amputated, at least he survived. Because the beggar had leaned against that wall for many years, a dark stain had been left there. Rainwater formed a small puddle where he used to sit, reflecting the dim yellow light of the street lamp, while Professor Schiller stood across the road, looking at the puddle, lost in thought. The young Batman ultimately couldn't keep his composure. He jumped down and appeared in front of Professor Schiller. "Good evening, Batman. I remember you called yourself that last time, so I'll call you that too." Batman's eyes under his mask stared intently at him. He said, "Don't beat around the bush with me. You know why I'm here. You're here to be the savior. I know, for example, you saved a poor beggar. Is the missing persons case in Mosen Street District you're doing?" Batman asked. Professor Schiller shook his head. Batman said, "You are the only outsider, and you have no motive to be here." Professor Schiller said, "Clearly, you already have the answer in your heart. So why do you still come to ask me? You are always good at turning what you have already determined into a question to ask others. If you get an answer you are satisfied with, you will naturally be content. But if you don't get the answer you want, you will become very angry. If I say I am not the murderer, you will be very angry, but your anger does not come from your sense of justice, but merely because I did not give you the answer you wanted. You think you can foresee everything, right?" Professor Schiller asked. I said, "Don't beat around the bush with me. You are the only suspect here." Professor Schiller hadn't finished speaking when he saw a batarang fly past his neck. He seemed to have underestimated him a bit. Whether it was Batman at this time or Batman later, although they don't kill people, they often beat up criminals and don't shy away from breaking their legs and then sending them to the hospital. However, clearly, this young Batman was missing a step. Professor Schiller didn't speak for a moment, and another batarang flew past his neck. This time, Professor Schiller didn't use his spider sense to turn his head in advance, but quietly watched Batman. That batarang left a cut on his neck, and blood flowed out. At this moment, a series of hurried footsteps suddenly came from the end of the alley, and a voice shouted, "Stop!" Batman turned to look at the end of the alley. Under the street lamp, Detective Gordon was holding a pistol, aiming at the two of them. "Hello, Detective Gordon," Professor Schiller said. Detective Gordon walked slowly, holding his gun. He said, "Put down your weapons and don't move." Professor Schiller spread his hands, indicating that he had no weapons, while Batman put away the batarang he was holding in his hand. As Detective Gordon got closer, he realized that Professor Schiller's neck was bleeding, and the blood flowed down his shoulder, even wetting his shirt. Professor Schiller said, "Batman, you made a mistake. You said I am the only suspect, but this detective clearly doesn't think so. Besides me, you are also someone who has no motive to be here. I'm here to investigate the missing persons case," Batman said. "So am I," Professor Schiller said. "But clearly you are no nobler than I am, because neither of us is police. I think only this Detective Gordon has the authority to do so now." "I will find the evidence," Batman said. "If you also need evidence, then what's the difference between you and the police?" Professor Schiller suddenly asked. Batman was speechless for a moment. He had originally thought Professor Schiller would ask him for evidence. Batman also knew that although Professor Schiller appeared where he shouldn't have, this couldn't be used as evidence to prove that he had committed a crime. So he was determined to find silk and clues to prove that Professor Schiller was the murderer. But Professor Schiller's question hit the nail on the head. Batman thought he had always believed that the police were useless because they had to rely on evidence for everything. Even if a murder occurred in front of them, if they didn't see the murderer, they wouldn't arrest the most suspicious person. It was like this when his parents died. No police gave a proper explanation, and no one was brought to justice. His parents died, but no one paid the price. He thought if he also needed evidence, then why didn't he become a police officer at the Gotham Police Department? But if he didn't need evidence and just arrested anyone, then what was the difference between him and a criminal? Batman regretted it. He shouldn't have gone up and talked to Professor Schiller. Every conversation with Professor Schiller would shake him considerably. This kind of psychological and ideological wavering was the most terrifying. Every time he met Professor Schiller, Batman had to go back and ponder for at least 2 or 3 days to understand the question he posed, find his own answer, strengthen his confidence, and only then could he come out and act again. He felt that this was no different from taking classes in university. The teacher would pose a question, the students would think about it themselves, and then write a paper. And the next time they met, besides checking homework, new questions would be waiting for him, one question after another, as if there was no end. And Professor Schiller also complained inwardly that this Jonathan was truly capable. After Professor Schiller stole most of the fear toxin, not only did it not slow down his research speed, but it also made him kidnap experimental subjects even more frantically, causing Professor Schiller to be unable to sleep at night and have to clean up this mess. Chapter 10 Pride and Prejudice, Part 1. Compared to Schiller, Jonathan looked much more like a good person. He was thin, with long limbs, messy curly hair, and wore a pair of large black-rimmed glasses. There were always dark circles under his eyes, making him look very weak, like a complete homebody. His personality at school was also very much like a good-natured person. All Gotham University students knew that Jonathan's classes were not strict, and exams were easy to pass. Even when some students skipped class or were late, he would only adjust his glasses and tell them to sit down, never criticizing them. He looked like a complete bookworm, while in contrast Schiller, this new psychology professor, looked like a senior member of Arkham Asylum. Schiller's appearance was somewhat mixed race, with black hair and gray eyes. The original owner also seemed to be a straight man, as all his clothes were either black or gray, and most of them were coats, scarves, and formal wear for work. Schiller hadn't gone out to buy clothes either, so he still maintained the original owner's style of dress. As Gotham had been raining these past few days, Schiller almost always carried a black umbrella. How should one describe this image? It was as if he wouldn't be doing the audience justice if he wasn't the final villain in a TV series. And Schiller had only been there for a few days when his students discovered that he was, in fact, a very strict professor. His teaching level was indeed very high, but he showed no mercy to students who were late or left early. Moreover, he would give pop quizzes every few classes, and he directly stated in class that at least 30% of the people in this course would fail, making everyone nervous. Although the students at Gotham University came from good families, not all of them were rebellious. No university student would like such a professor. At first, there were several troublemakers in Schiller's class, but soon someone who was a gossip spread Schiller's resume. After that, the students in Schiller's class immediately became as quiet as docile sheep. After all, by any measure, it's impossible for a normal person to have repeatedly participated in so many serial murder cases. Soon, Schiller became a legendary figure at Gotham University, like a campus myth. Some people said their professor was actually the murderer in these serial murder cases, while others claimed he carried some kind of unfortunate curse, and wherever he went, terrible cases would occur. There were also imaginative people who fabricated a tragic background for Schiller, proposing that his involvement in so many murder investigations was actually for revenge. Various versions of the story always had one that met the students' expectations. Among students, such bizarre and somewhat terrifying stories always spread very quickly. Within a few days, most students knew about Schiller's past. When Schiller went out to buy breakfast, the counter he stood at was always empty. Students all watched him from afar, and in class, his assignments were collected with unparalleled neatness, something no other professor had ever achieved. Since that confrontation night, Schiller often felt Bruce following him, even during the day on campus. Fortunately, he had spider sense, so Bruce's numerous attempts to install cameras in his dormitory, psychology counseling room, and classroom podium all failed, but this gave Schiller inspiration. It seemed this young Batman still hadn't come to terms with things, but he noticed that Bruce seemed to have reached some agreement with Gordon. Schiller went to the Mosen Street district a few more times at night and found that the two of them really seemed to be working together. Finally, one day, as bedtime approached, the Gotham sky was already as black as ink. Schiller had no intention of going out tonight. He wanted to get a good night's sleep. University teaching wasn't as easy as he thought. The psychology clinic occasionally had students who genuinely needed psychology counseling, whether it was to relieve anxiety, alleviate depression, or truly needed psychological advice. These tasks were all very tiring, so he planned to get a good night's sleep. However, things didn't go as planned. Jonathan, who usually only moved around in the latter half of the night, suddenly left the campus in the first half of the night. Schiller knew he was probably going to catch a new batch of test subjects again. Indeed, Gordon and Bruce had been active in the Mosen Street district recently. Jonathan knew very well that he couldn't beat the police, and once caught, he would definitely be locked up. His physical fitness was even worse than Schiller's, and he might even spray fear toxin crookedly. After Batman cleared out the Water Ditch Gang and several other small gangs in the Mosen Street district, he had gradually gained some fame. People knew there was an eccentric vigilante fighting those gangs, and Jonathan hadn't dared to show his face for several nights. But his fear toxin was about to make a breakthrough, and no mad scientist could accept an experiment failing at such a critical juncture. His test subjects had already run out, and he had to capture new ones. Although he lacked physical strength, capturing test subjects was still very simple for him. He only needed to find a house with an open window, insert a tube, spray a large amount of anesthetic into it, then pry open their door and drag the person out. Schiller watched him leave the campus, and he himself had no choice but to put on his coat, grab his umbrella, and follow behind him. Although he didn't have a saintly complex and didn't intend to be a superhero savior, he would still intervene in tragedies that occurred in front of him. More importantly, if Jonathan continued to cause trouble like this, there wouldn't be many people left in the Mosen Street district, and Batman's debut journey would be cut short before it even began. Anyway, Scarecrow would eventually be caught by Batman, so why not today? Moreover, Schiller used a small trick. He planned to teach Batman a lesson and make him quickly snap out of that arrogant mindset. The current Batman still had room for error, because Joker was still just a circus performer. Schiller couldn't imagine how badly Batman would be played by Joker if he appeared before the young Batman now. Although Batman was still young and had many shortcomings, it had to be admitted that the skills he learned during his travels abroad were not for nothing. And Jonathan was not a meticulous criminal at the moment. He hadn't undergone special training, nor did he have any anti-detection awareness. Many of his clues had been discovered by Batman and Gordon. The two of them teamed up and made their way to the underground room of the small church. There, they discovered Jonathan's laboratory. It wasn't a very sophisticated laboratory. In fact, it looked very much like a shady workshop. It was dim, cramped, and had a foul odor. Batman looked at the drainage pipe in the underground room and said, "I think I might know where those people went." Gordon walked over with his pistol. He said, "Although I really don't want to ask, I have to write the truth in my operation report. Aqua Regia. It can not only melt metal but also the most difficult parts of the human body." "All right, I get it. You don't need to say any more. I don't want to hear the details," Gordon said. They investigated this small laboratory for a while. Suddenly, Gordon found some traces under an old wooden crate. Some broken fallen leaves. "North American red pine," Batman said. "I saw its cotyledons. Damn it. Where are there any pine trees in all of Gotham? Otherwise, the weather here wouldn't be like this," Gordon said. "I think there's one place that has this plant," Batman said. "Gotham University. It's the best place in all of Gotham City. On the widest pedestrian walkway there, both sides are lined with this plant." Gordon squatted down, carefully examining the traces, and said, "The murderer's boots must have stepped on these fallen leaves. There's still mud clinging to them. Clearly, the heavy rain these past few days caused him a lot of trouble. After he arrived here, the dirt inadvertently fell off, and he didn't bother to clean it up." Gordon looked up and said, "The murderer is a Gotham University student? Perhaps also a teacher," Batman said. "Is it the person you threatened that day?" Gordon asked. "I wasn't threatening him," Batman said. "But you cut his neck with a batarang and made him bleed a lot. A wound that long will surely leave a scar," Gordon said. "Are you sympathizing with a criminal?" Batman asked. "He is not a criminal. At least not until after a trial." "Trial?" Batman snorted coldly. Gordon sensed Batman's distrust of the judicial system. He didn't righteously refute him. He had been a police officer in Gotham for more than just a day or two. The judicial system here was indeed untrustworthy, or rather, the entire system of order here was untrustworthy. "But in my opinion, you wielding a dangerous weapon to arbitrarily harm an unarmed ordinary person, that is a threat," Gordon said. "Unarmed?" Batman said. He suddenly found himself unable to refute Gordon, because according to his knowledge, Schiller indeed didn't seem to have received any professional combat training. Batman was confident he could knock him down with one punch. But he had been troubled by this person for many days without any solution. He suddenly remembered something he had heard during his travels. Words are more powerful than fists. But that was as far as it went, Batman thought. The murderer is someone from Gotham University. There's almost no other answer. Isn't the evidence conclusive enough? Perhaps it's time to send that crazy professor to prison. He looked at the stained drainage pipe at his feet, where the souls of over 40 people had disappeared, and among them, there must have been someone's parents. On that night long ago, his parents' lives vanished in an alley, yet no one paid the price they should have. But now it was different. With him there, these criminals would all eventually go to where they belonged, and not a single one would escape.